Okay, good morning. Time now a few minutes after 8 o'clock in the morning in Tokyo, Thursday, September the 16th, 2021. Welcome to another edition of the World Bank Group morning seminar organized by the World Bank Tokyo office. My name is Koichi Omori. I am Senior External Affairs Officer of the World Bank based in Tokyo. We organize many online seminars introducing how the World Bank is helping the developing countries and the latest report presented by the World Bank Group economists and specialists. This morning, we have a special program. We are honored to have Amit Dal, Regional Director for Africa in Human Development Practice Group, connecting from Washington. Good evening or good morning to you, Amit. How are you?
Evening and good morning to you, Koichi. Very nice to see you again, and also Tomoko. It has been a while, so wonderful to see you.
Great. Thank you very much for connecting us from Washington. During the month of September, we are running a virtual recruitment mission to hire Japanese nationals. As part of this virtual recruitment program, currently 13 World Bank positions are posted on our website. The two positions are related to health sector, and Amit is the hiring manager for one of them, health specialist, health economist position in Malawi. We'll listen to Amit for the next 30, 40 minutes on the World Bank's Human Capital Project as an institutional effort to strengthen our program in human development. And we'll ask him as to what the World Bank is doing in Africa in this regard. Following his presentation, I'll read your questions. If you did not have opportunities to send your question in advance, please do so even during the seminar using online form posted on the announcement page for this seminar, or you can simply post your question on the chat section of the YouTube screen. So I'll read your question after keynote presentation by Amit, asking him to respond. With that, I'd like to ask Amit to come in and formally start your presentation. Amit, please.
Thank you again very much, Koichi, and good morning to all colleagues who are on YouTube and viewing this by live stream. It is a real pleasure to be able to talk to you and reach you, and really delighted to be able to do this. And I know we are all in a difficult situation in the world with the pandemic, and it's been a real challenge for all of us. I would have loved to be in Tokyo for the Olympics last month, but unfortunately it wasn't to be. But hopefully soon in the future we will all come out of this. And why I'm talking about the pandemic is because what it has shown is the importance of human capital and really making sure we invest in building strong systems, especially strong health systems, which can react and respond to crises such as the one that we are in the middle of right now around the world, which we haven't seen in over 100 years. So I just thought, and Koichi and Tomoko felt that it would be useful to talk a little bit through what the World Bank is doing on what we call the Human Capital Project as a whole. And I can talk also a little bit after that or in answering your questions on what we are doing on human capital and human development in Africa, or any other questions that you may have. So very happy to take those questions. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the Human Capital Project, and Koichi, if we can go to the next slide, thank you. Basically, what is the Human Capital Index and the Human Capital Project? How we are engaging with countries in that? What are some of the examples of policy operations that we are doing? And then we can conclude. So it's not a very long presentation because I thought it would be good to also have time for questions and answers. So if we could go to the next slide, please. In 2018, what we decided in the World Bank was that human capital was, everyone realized, was a very important imperative for economic development, for poverty reduction, for reducing inequality. And so our president at that time, Dr. Jim Kim, really asked us to come up with something called the Human Capital Index, and then also develop the Human Capital Project. And that's what we've been doing over the last few years. So just to explain to you what the Human Capital Index is, the Human Capital Index basically measures the amount of human capital that a child born today can expect to acquire by age 18, given the risk of poor health and poor education that prevails in the country where she lives. So basically, how much capital would you be able to acquire and in those 18 years, and we try to quantify that, and come up with a measure of human capital and productivity. So there are three key ingredients of the human capital index. One is that of survival, that is, will child born today survive to school age 5? Second is schooling, how much schooling will they complete, and very importantly, how much will they learn. It's not just the number of years of school, it's also the quality of education that a child gets, which is very important in building up the human capital. And finally, on the health side, what we have is, will they leave school in good health, ready for further learning and or work, because we need them to be productive members of society to be able to have a long lifespan in the labor market of 40-50 years. So these are the sort of the ingredients of the human capital index. And Koichi, if you don't mind, next slide please. What we did with that is that we took all of these together: children who don't survive to fulfill their potential, the schooling aspect, and the health aspect, which is where we looked at the adult survival rate for children, as well as the stunting rates, which are very important determinants of human capital, and came up with this index, which is basically a multiplicative index with a maximum value of 1, and it measures the productivity of a future worker relative to the benchmark of complete education and full health. So if you had 14 years of education and highest quality of education, and 100% survival rates, 0% stunting, and high levels of adult survival rates, the human capital index in that country would be 1. Uh, uh, just to say that the highest human capital index country with the highest human capital index ended up being Singapore, and that index was roughly 0.9. So there's no country which has a human capital index of 1. And Japan is also one of the countries with one of the highest levels of human capital index, as you would expect. So next slide, please. Thank you. So we did this in 2018. We did it for the first time, and then we launched another index, another round of looking at the index in 2020. As you can expect, over time, in a short period of time of 1 or 2 years, there are not going to be huge changes in the level of in the human capital index level. Though now, of course, post pandemic, we will be launching something next year, and it will be interesting to see. I think we will see some more significant changes than you would normally expect to see, because the pandemic has really, as we all know, created a lot of challenges on the education systems and brought a lot of stress on the education systems, on the health systems. So maybe next year when we do it again, we will see even sharper changes than we have between 2018 and 2020. But just to say that in 2020, what we have, and we've broken it down rather than country by country because it would be too busy on the slide. I just broke it down by region, and what it shows is that Sub-Saharan Africa region, which is the region I work on, has the lowest human capital index of 0.4. So, which means a child born today can only expect to achieve 40% of their productivity potential as compared to someone who had full education and full health. So the GDP contribution of that would be 60% less, or rather, the potential of that person would be 2.5 times more, going from 0.4 to 1.0, if they had a good education and a good health system. That is what we are looking at. So you can imagine how much GDP losses are being incurred by countries because they are not investing fully in their, or most effectively in their children. So that's kind of what we wanted to say here. And sub-Saharan Africa comes out to be the lowest. North America, the average is about 0.73, 0.74, which comes out to be the highest. And then your own region, which is East Asia and Pacific, is around 0.6, even though I think it masks significant differences, because on one hand, you have countries with relatively low human capital potential index like Laos or Cambodia, and then the other hand, you have countries with very high human capital index in the region, like yourselves in Japan. So I think what this did was the creation of the index. What it did was when we shared it with our counterparts in countries and discussions with political and policy leaders in Africa, in South Asia, in the Middle East, all over the world, it generated a lot of discussion and debate. And the ministers of finance really got very excited about it, because this is showing them or quantifying to them where their country is. Now, I would be the first person to say that this is not a perfect index by any chance. There are some data issues. Obviously, there are other things we are not measuring that also contribute to human capital, but this is a good proxy for seeing where a country is, and that's what excited the ministers of finance. And the questions then they asked were, okay, what do we need to do to actually move from 0.4 in sub-Saharan Africa to 0.6, 0.7 in the next decade or 2 decades? So what all do we need to do to actually really focus on that? And for us who work on human capital and human development over the last 2-3 decades, it was very exciting to see the importance that the policymakers in countries now started paying to human capital. And over the last 3 years, you've seen a big enhancement in that level of interest and what countries are doing on human capital. And so if the pandemic had not happened, I think we would have seen a steady increase in this index over the next decade or so, and countries doing much better. The pandemic has thrown everything into crisis, so we will have to see what to do, but we are still very much focused on this, and policymakers are also still very much focused on trying to ensure that we actually invest adequately in human capital, even though the fiscal space has tightened over the last 15 to 18 months. So these are some of the things that we've been discussing with them. So if we go to the next slide, Koichi, what the next slide was the types of questions and the discussions that we were having with policymakers. So what can countries do to improve human capital of the next generation? And we had 4 or 5, and again, I'm sort of making these very broad statements. We actually had a lot of discussions around each of them. But first one is to elevate the human capital agenda across the whole of government. So I think what we discussed with the ministers was that human capital is not just an issue of education or just an issue of health or just an issue of social protection. It is actually cutting across these 3 sectors, but also across other sectors, because, for example, if you don't have good water and sanitation facilities in schools, which you don't have in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, many parents will not feel comfortable sending their girls to school. And as we all know, girls' education is a huge determinant of productivity, of economic growth. So water and sanitation is important. If we don't have the right kind of fiscal environment and strong macro environment, we won't have enough resources going in. And if we don't have a good governance system, those resources will not be spent appropriately. So the macro also becomes very important. So it's not just a sectoral issue, human capital, but it is a cross-sectoral issue, and we want the whole government to actually look at it rather than just line ministry by line ministry. So that is one of the things we said, is that let's look at it holistically in every country rather than ministry by ministry, because it is the solutions are holistic. Second is, I think, ensure clear ownership and accountability at the highest levels. And this is what I was saying, what really excited us was that the policymakers, ministers of finance, ministers of line ministers, prime ministers, they've all gotten very excited about this index. And in a way, it has generated a little bit of a competition between countries that, okay, if you are here and I'm here, I need to really start focusing on how I can move up, or both, and you will keep moving up. I also need to catch up with you quickly. So, I think ownership and accountability at the highest levels of government and the highest levels of policymakers are important, and that is one of the key things that we have been trying to do in our discussions with them. The third thing, as I was just saying, reflect commitment to human capital in public budgets. So in many countries in Africa, for example, the budgets that are being spent on education or health or social protection or human development as a whole are very low. And the quality of spending also needs improvement. So, but if you don't put in enough money, it's going to be very difficult to squeeze out efficiencies just from the quality side. So, what we've told governments is, or what we've discussed with governments is the fact that we really need to invest uh, adequately in human capital, and we need to spend more resources in human capital, and those resources have to be spent better. So not just more resources, but spending them better. But having that discussion has also been very important and useful in getting policymakers more focused on human capital. Then, of course, if we don't have data on what is happening on spending, what is happening on outcomes, we are flying blind. And Japan, for example, has excellent data on a lot of things. So I think your policymakers can actually make use of that as they make decisions on where to invest, how to invest, what to invest in. And that is what we are trying to discuss with all our client countries, is that we jointly need to work very hard on improving the quality of data, measuring it and measuring it repeatedly, so that policymakers can make informed decisions about how to invest in the future. And then finally, the other thing is how do we leapfrog? So innovative approaches and modern technologies to expand access to high quality service at a lower cost. And the pandemic actually has shown us very much the importance of this, because countries which have invested in technology, for example, in digital technology, were able to actually provide education to students at a time when everyone had to go back home and when the schools were closed. While countries which did not have a good digital systems, and this is just one example, had much more challenges. So in many countries, students, especially the poorer students, have probably lost a year or more of education because they did not have access to these resources. So for us together to think about what are those key interventions, technologies that we can help to leapfrog a country from one level to the other in a quicker period of time, is something that we are also discussing with countries. And it varies. The solution varies between country to country, depending on the context. So Koichi, next slide, please. So then I think what we did is we didn't just do the index and the previous slide, which talked about what countries can do to improve human capital of the next generation. This was within the context of what we call a human capital project. So we came out with the index. At the same time, we came out with the human capital project, which was a global effort to accelerate more and better investments in people for inclusive economic growth. So it had three main components. One was, of course, the index, which we discussed. The second was the analytics, a program of measurement, research, analysis that helps to invest in people and protect human capital. And the third was the country engagement, which is basically engaging intensively with countries, building support groups across country policymakers, peer-to-peer learning, and so that countries can learn from each other's experience, because that is the best way in a lot of, as we've seen, that's the best way to learn, rather than someone lecturing to people, this is what you should do. The policymaker in country A in Japan can talk to the policymakers in India about what they've done and on certain things and how they've become better. Similarly, the Indians can inform the Japanese about what they've done and how things have become better in certain aspects. And that is the peer-to-peer learning we've seen has a major positive impact in people actually sharing experiences and learning, and then bringing some of those experiences to across countries. So the Human Capital Index is kind of a combination. Sorry, Human Capital Project is a combination of these three key types of interventions. Next slide, please. So this slide, I'm not going to go into any detail. I think you have the presentation. So very quickly, this is just giving you a timeline. And basically, we started thinking about this in 2016. It was in 2018 at our annual meetings in Bali that we actually launched the Human Capital Index. And last year, 2020, was we updated the Human Capital Index with the numbers you saw on 3 or 4 slides ago. And we are going to be doing more on that as we move forward. And as you can read here, it says that the Human Capital Project has really gained traction with tangible results in countries. So we started off what we call in 2017, 2018 as early adopter countries. We asked countries, would you like to join the Human Capital Project? Even if you don't join the Human Capital Project, we are very happy to work with you and partner with you, because that's part of our role in thinking through Human Capital Index and human capital issues. But if you join the Human Capital Index, we will actually have a project. We will actually provide more intensive support, technical assistance, and guidance to move forward. So we had in the beginning 28 countries which we called early adopter countries, and now we have 82 countries which are part of the Human Capital Project. So it's grown significantly over the last 2 years. Next slide, please. And here you can see the list of 82 countries. Actually, I'm sorry, you probably can't read it very much because it's in very small font, but these countries are spread out across Latin America, Africa, South Asia, East Asia, the Middle East, so and Europe and Central Asia. So all the regions of the world that the World Bank covers, we have quite a few countries which are part of the Human Capital Project, and there is over 30 countries in Africa which are part of the project, which we are very excited about. And basically, we really try and build a network, as we say, of these 82 countries to promote the peer learning and policy momentum at the highest levels. And so that's kind of what we've been trying to focus on with the Human Capital Project. And next slide, please. Thank you. And just again, I'm not going to read each of these things, but just to say that knowledge exchange, as I said earlier, is a very big part of what we do. So over the last year, of course, with COVID, we've really focused on a lot of just-in-time COVID-related seminars and webinars in Kyrgyz, with Singapore, with Rwanda and the Republic of Korea, just sharing experiences and knowledge. And you can see what some of the policymakers have said about it. A lot of the countries actually join these policy webinars, and very intensive discussion takes place. And I think I learn a lot from each of them, because there are a lot of things countries are doing, lots of innovations countries are doing, which I would not know about, and that comes out from here. And I think other countries are also adopting some of these innovations and interventions that have been successful in some countries. So I think this has been really a huge way of getting everyone motivated around this very critical and important issue. Next slide, please. We also have what we call a global forum. We had a first Human Capital Global Forum in early March, and then we followed that up with a specific forum on Africa, where we focused on the whole issue of women and girls empowerment, because we feel that to develop in the African continent, the focus really needs to be on women and girls, and we really need to invest intensively on women and girls so that that has a very positive and virtuous cycle over the lifetime and intergenerationally. So this is what a lot of the focus was of the Africa Regional Day. We got a lot of policymakers, international experts, and other colleagues to join in and have that discussion. Again, all of these are happening right now virtually. We actually haven't managed to meet anyone, but over time, as we come out of COVID, there will be sort of some more non-virtual seminars, and we hope that some of you can also join on that. So as a result of these things, it has generated a lot of demand, and other countries have also joined the Human Capital project, including yours. Japan, Malaysia, and Moldova have also joined. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of some of the projects that now, as a result of the focus on human capital that the World Bank has been doing, in Cote d'Ivoire, focusing on expanding safety net systems. In Panama, basically, strengthening institutions to foster human capital accumulation. In Guatemala, I think the resources put in to mitigate the impact of COVID and protect human capital. In Tonga, again, school fee relief, targeted crisis responsiveness, social safety nets. So this is just 3 or 4 examples of types of things that we've been doing over the last few years. And if you talk over the last year, obviously a lot of focus has been on the health response to the pandemic, trying to get kids, if not back in school, but at least learning remotely. And then on the safety net side, as people have fallen into poverty, on the social protection side, we are coming in with safety net programs to help mitigate the impacts of those crises. So huge, over the last 12, 18 months, a huge amount of emphasis around the world that the World Bank has put on human capital. And I think the last slide is the next one, please. And we have a lot of materials that we will be happy to share with you and distribute to you. And we are actually having a big conclave of all the ministers, again, virtual conclave next month at annual meetings, where we are really going to talk about the whole issue of disruptive technology for innovating in human capital delivery. So, and then the next big issue is going to be the whole issue of human capital and climate change. So that's kind of, I'm sorry, I went on a bit too long, but that's kind of what the whole agenda is about worldwide, that the World Bank has been focusing on with our partner countries. And we look forward to taking this forward intensively over the next few years. And so let me stop now and turn the mic back over to Koichi. And thank you all very much again for listening to me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit, for your presentation describing what the World Bank has been doing and is doing in the area of human development, particularly around the human capital project as the institutional effort to strengthen engagement in the human development sector. So let me raise some questions to you. Perhaps categorizing the question in a 3 bucket. First one about the first category is about the human capital project itself. Second category a little bit about Africa, and then thirdly, I would like to ask you to say a few words, particularly encouraging messages to those who are thinking about applying for your positions. So let me go through those 3 buckets. And of course, we are welcoming viewers to post your question on the chat section on the YouTube. First, before getting into the question, the Amit's presentation is going to be posted on the announcement page of the seminar shortly after the seminar finished. So please take advantage of that to download and then and use them for your own purpose. Okay, first question. You mentioned that we are going to be revising the human capital index next year. Would you please, explain a little bit more about the timeline, where we are now on the effort, particularly exactly when next year we would be able to expect a new index or revised index coming out? Thank you. You are muted.
Sorry. Thank you very much. That's actually a very good question because we've just initiated discussions around that right now as to when would be a good time to launch it or to actually get all the data and start doing the calculations because it is a very labor intensive exercise and we are still in the middle of the pandemic. So we want to actually see actually have some idea of the impact that the pandemic has had. So one of the questions I think what will happen is part of the deliberations we are having right now, that it would be probably at the next annual meetings, which are going to be in Marrakesh, World Bank IMF annual meetings, which are going to be in Marrakesh, that it will be launched. And the process of sort of data collection, data analysis, and updating these numbers is just about beginning. It is going to be interesting because we may not have enough time, even in these last year or two, it may not be enough to actually show what has actually happened because of the pandemic, because sometimes these effects are delayed. But I think we'll still be able to pick up some interesting nuggets of information which will come out next year. And then, the following one I think is going to be even more important because I think by then we will hopefully all be out of the pandemic, but then we may be actually seeing some of the most negative impacts of the pandemic coming into play, with children not going back to school, people falling sick, people falling into poverty. So I think we'll already get some very interesting results from the next one and the following one. And I think we'll have to think very quickly with uh, partner countries and with other development partners as to what we can work on to actually mitigate those impacts very rapidly.
Okay, thank you for your responses. Next question. You talked about the use of the digital or technologies. Toward the end, you also mentioned about the disruptive technologies and human capital. Now, one thing I would like to ask you is how we are doing as to partnering, working together with the private sector, because the private sector is going to be the key, particularly when we talk about the digital infrastructure, etc. So would you please, describe where we are now in terms of the private sector engagement? Thank you.
Excellent question. Excellent question. I think what we have realized in the World Bank, of course, and as we have discussions with our key government counterparts, that this is definitely one area where the government cannot do it alone. And so, both at the country level, we are encouraging governments and actually working with governments to build partnerships with the private sector, because that's where the cutting edge of the technology is and cutting edge of the knowledge is. And at a global level, we are actually hooking up with a lot of top level entrepreneurs, for example, in the US, in the Silicon Valley, in Japan, and others who have this knowledge and information, which obviously a lot of us don't possess and a lot of governments don't possess. And we're trying to do a lot of analytical work. We're trying to build it into our, the whole issue of sharing this knowledge and information through these webinars and seminars that we are doing. So we're really trying to get the private sector front and center in this area, because we know that without them, we will probably move much slower than we could have. So it's a very good question, and this is front and center of what we are aiming to do.
Great, thank you very much. Also, you described several examples toward the end of your presentation on the human capital, human development effort in the World Bank lending operations. The earlier you mentioned about the country engagement as the key, particularly promoting the peer learning among the our member countries, and you talked about you introduced some of the examples, including some global forum, conference going on virtually, etc. Now, one step stepping in a little bit further on this issue, and then in case of climate change, for example, we have certain kind of institutional target of whatever percentage of lending or efforts should be devoted to the climate related activities through the entire World Bank portfolio, etc. In case of human capital, certainly this is targeting a health and education sector. But on the other hand, like engagement of the private sector, like the digital infrastructure, etc., it covers various other sector also. So is there any effort institutionally as to mainstreaming the human capital concept in the activities, both lending and the analytical work beyond the human development sector?
Sure. Thanks, Koichi, for that question. There is, so just to give a couple of examples, A is that the human capital reviews that we have started to do in countries are going to be part of what we call our extended core diagnostics that the World Bank is going to be doing in every country. So that's one thing. The second and very exciting thing is that, and that's going to be very significant, is that the IDA 20 discussions, or IDA deputies, including your own country, have requested that human capital now be a separate pillar uh, of the IDA 20 negotiation. So there will be some very specific actions on human capital that we will be able to take, and we will take in partnership with our client countries as a result of that. And so the IDA 20 negotiations, as you know, have started and are ongoing. So we are part of sort of developing that pillar. And I think that's really going to put human capital front and center in the agenda as we move forward for the next 5, 10, 15 years.
I would like to gradually shift to the second category of the question, the Africa. Now, let me start with this question, which was posted by Ida-san on the YouTube chat screen. Hi, I am Akiko Ida from JICA Africa Department. If it often takes time to get the impact from human capital initiatives, how would you maintain the balance between human capital investment and debt sustainability in Africa? I would like to put this as the first Africa-related question.
Okay, that's a difficult question to answer. No, what I think what the way we are doing it as one of the things we are saying is this is a whole of government approach. So it's not just education, health, and social protection. It's not just HD. If we want to actually make a difference in what we are doing, it covers macro, and fiscal and debt sustainability is absolutely critical to that. So if we have a discussion on what we call the DPO instrument, for example, a human capital DPO, development policy operations that we are doing in more and more countries, the first pillar of those operations is always on the macro and fiscal side. So that's kind of, if that is not right, if that is not in sync, whatever else we do on the policy side in education or in health or in social protection is likely to have much lower impact than it would if the macro policy and macro environment is sustainable and is working in the right direction. So I think there's a great level of correlation in what we do because we really want to focus on that, and that's increasingly what we are doing in our new lending and new operations.
Thank you for your responses. Let me read the set of questions from the viewers submitted in advance related to Africa. The first one, what are the common challenges of human development in Africa?
Thank you for that. Clearly, I think, and I originally come from the education sector, so let me start off with that. I think one of the key challenges that we are seeing is on the quality of education, and so that is something which is a big challenge, and now it has been exacerbated even more with COVID. Africa had been very successful in actually increasing access to educational opportunities, especially for boys, but even for girls. Now, this is going to be a challenge to see over the next 2 or 3 years. Are those boys and girls actually going to come back or end up dropping out, especially the girls? And so, unfortunately, access is also going to become a much bigger issue than we had thought it would be 18 months ago, just because things have gone totally out of whack, not just in Africa, but around the world. So I think the quality of education and access to educational opportunities is going to be big. and focus on girls education, making sure girls learn, making sure girls come to school, stay in school. I think that's going to be very critical. So that's one of the big challenges many of our countries in Africa are going to be facing. The second big challenge, I would say, is that on health systems. I think we have to really ramp up uh, what we are doing on the health side. We have been investing in health systems, but they're still weak. And I think governments also, the pandemic has been a wake up call for every country in the world, not just the African countries. But I think the real focus on enhancing health systems, enhancing primary healthcare systems is going to be critical, along with focusing a lot more on pandemic prevention and mitigation. So that is also going to be a really big thing, that epidemic and pandemic, working on those issues is also going to be really big in Africa. And we are already doing quite a bit. For example, with the Africa Centers for Disease Control, with the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Task Team. So we're doing quite a lot, but I think we have to do a lot more moving forward. And then the third issue would be that of making sure, over the last 10-15 years, a lot of countries in the region have actually put in place safety net systems, which is very good because they've really cushioned and helped cushion the shocks that people have felt out because they fall into poverty, and this has been much more so over the last 18 months. But I think as we are doing more and building stronger systems, uh, um, doing more effective targeting and creating social registries for these social protection systems in the country, I think we are also thinking much more long term as to how to make these systems more sustainable. So not just having these as safety nets for people falling into poverty, but also as a springboard so that we can help people move out of poverty into gainful employment. So that's kind of what has been a big challenge and a big focus of what we are trying to do in Africa on the social protection side. So these are some of the key challenges. It's a very challenging time. I have to paradoxically say it's also very exciting because I think the potential is vast in Africa. We can really do a lot, and the opportunities are fantastic. I think the governments are committed. So it's really time for us in the World Bank, for the governments, for the development partners around the world to come together and really make a big push over the next few years to focus on addressing these issues and improving the quality of human capital in the continent.
Thank you, Amit, for your responses. I forgot to mention before reading those series of questions related to Africa, those are the questions from Akiko Abe-san from the Waseda University. Thank you very much for your question. Next question from Abe-san. In what ways the past aid by the World Bank help improve the life conditions of the countries in the most needed?
I think I think across all the sectors, I think the world, and uh, I don't want to be immodest here because we haven't succeeded in everything, but I think what we have worked with countries and helped countries on beginning to get children into school. As I said, access had really become much less of an issue before the pandemic. To actually try and really focus the governments on quality of education. And that effort had started over the last few years and is still gaining momentum. On health systems, I think we have to do a lot more, but I think we've been successful in several countries in really putting in place much stronger primary healthcare systems. But again, a long way to go. But that also, I think I would say, a success story. And safety nets, I think, has been a big success story for a continent which had very little safety nets at the turn of the century to actually having developed safety nets in almost all the countries. And the effect of those have really been felt during the pandemic, positive impact. Otherwise, things could have been much worse. I think that has been a big success of how we have worked with countries over the last 20 years. I think in all these areas, as I said, there have been failures. There have been things that have not worked well, but I think what I think we've really tried to do is to learn from those experiences and gain from those experiences, and work with countries to design or redesign programs which we are hoping will have more impact. And as COVID is coming in, I think where I would really like to point out that we've been very, very uh, intensively involved in the COVID relief side. On the health side, right from March 2020 or April 2020, we put in resources to help countries get access to materials, masks, testing equipment, monitoring of COVID, and all those sorts of things came in. And then we put in, that was a big $6 billion facility. And then now we have a $20 billion facility for acquisition and deployment of vaccines, which we are, a lot of that is going into Africa. So $3 billion have already gone into Africa out of these $20 billion, and we are expecting to do a whole lot more in the years to come. So, so those are some of the very sort of things that we've done very recently. We've put in a lot more money into education, as I said, to make sure that kids who are not in school are actually learning as a result of the pandemic. And so we're putting resources into virtual learning, into technology, and sorry, my light has gone off. Let me try and switch it on. And into interventions such as those has really been a big thing that we are doing. And then finally, a huge amount of investment into safety net programs over the last 2 years. So the pandemic has really kind of made us do things much more quicker, more nimbly, and learn much quicker into what works and what doesn't work. Let me stop here.
Thank you for your responses. Let me continue reading a question from Abe-san. What areas of human development does the World Bank try to promote in the next 10 years in Africa?
I think all these areas are going to remain very important. What we are going to focus a lot more on is the digital side. I think this is where I think we see a big bang for the buck. What we will try and focus a lot more on is women's and girls' empowerment, because again, the evidence is very clear. Investing in women and girls has a huge impact in the longer term. And Koichi, you will remember, because both of us worked together in Bangladesh, what the investing in girls, how the economy has changed in a matter of just one generation. It's a totally different country than it was in the early 1990s. By the 2010, it was a completely different country, because they really made a decision to invest extensively in girls' education. And so I think investment in women and girls is going to be a very critical aspect of what we are going to be doing. Also, looking at the whole impact of how can human capital, the role that human capital can play in alleviating some of the climate changes that we are facing, is also going to be extremely important. And so, building social registries so that we have a system which can be used to by different ministries and by different programs to target workers more efficiently is going to be critical. And then, of course, as I said, the whole issue of pandemics, I think it is going to be a very big issue in the coming months and years, and focusing on building health systems, and then resilience against pandemics is going to be very, very important. So as I said earlier, the agenda is huge. Not one institution alone or one government alone can't do it. We all have to work together and partner effectively to actually resolve these challenges. But as I said, it also makes it an exciting time to be in the area of development around the world.
Thank you. Related to your final point, to the last question, final question from Abe-san. Which organization does the World Bank closely collaborate to help achieve human development in Africa?
So we collaborate across a range of institutions. Obviously, a lot of the development agencies of various governments are very prominent in Africa, and we collaborate closely with them. With DFID, with the AFD, the French Development Agency, with JICA a lot. In fact, we have these deep dives with JICA every 6 months or so, because there's a JICA, and the government of Japan actually invests a lot in Africa, and so we collaborate a lot with your government on that. So similarly, there are other governments, but these are some of the 3 or 4 major governments that we work with, or development partners that we work with in our work in Africa.
Very much. The question from Taniguchi-san from the Air Water. Thank you very much for your question. Is education a major setback in economic development of FCB, fragile conflict and violence affected countries in Africa?
I mean, we definitely see poorer outcomes in education in countries affected, in FCB countries in Africa. Children are less likely to go to school. Parents are less likely to send them to school. And I'm talking about, not talking about COVID, I'm talking about sort of in a quote unquote normal situation. Girls are much more less likely to go to school because parents are scared to send their girls to school, not just because there are no adequate water and sanitation facilities, but simple things such as boundary walls across schools, which give a sense of security and reassurance, often are not there. And so we definitely see access levels drop. And because of that, and not enough emphasis on the quality of education, the quality of education is also poorer. So, for example, just to say that some of the worst outcomes in on the education side in the continent, we see where the human capital index is the lowest, is unfortunately in the fragile and conflict affected countries. Now, what we have tried to do in response is to not just say, okay, this works in Japan, so it will work in some FCV country in Africa. No. So what we've tried to say is, okay, how do we contextualize this intervention, which has worked well in Japan, in an FCV context? And we have a whole FCV group, as you well know, which thinks through these challenges and issues with us. And then we try and devise solutions which are context specific, country specific. But it is definitely, I think in FCV countries, the other challenges are that of capacity. How do we make sure that even if it's a program, how do we make sure that the implementation of that program happens? Because in the end, that is where the rubber hits the road. If it's a fantastic program but is not implemented, it's much less useful than a program which is not as good but is implemented very well. So implementation, that has been a big challenge in FCV countries, and we try and come up with very innovative ways to help governments implement and for us to supervise these programs.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to move on to the third category of question, and this is, I think, going to be a good way of wrapping up a seminar. As you are the hiring manager for one of the 13 positions currently, we are running as part of the recruitment mission virtually. This is the health specialist, health economist position in Malawi. And apparently, TOR is posted on the website, so people can take a look at the TOR, understanding what exactly this position is about in detail. But I would like to ask you to say a few words about the position. What do you expect actually? Someone who is going to be coming in to take this position to deliver to do. And also the final remarks to encourage the people, particularly those who are watching this seminar and interested in applying, to apply. So I would like to ask you, to say a few words on that as your final remarks, and we wrap up the seminar. Thank you.
Koichi. So let me start off by scaring people and telling them we expect them to really deliver the moon. But seriously, I think what we are expecting the person to first of all learn on the job. Everyone coming in new will have a little bit of a learning period, and we will pair them up with someone who is more experienced and knows what is happening in the health sector in that particular country. It could be Malawi, it could be Zambia, it could be any country. And then I think what we are looking for is their expertise and the willingness and drive to work hard to basically focus on how do we really improve the health systems in the country? How do we put in place programs which will actually increase the human capital index in the country through health sector interventions. And then what we are also looking for is someone who may be a health specialist or a health economist, but can work very well cross-sectorally, both within HD sectors, but can interact very well with the macro people, can interact very well with the water people, can interact very well with the roads people, can interact very well with the energy people. For example, one of the key challenges we are facing right now is the ultra cold chain. For vaccines, for the Pfizer vaccines. And so, energy becomes very important. And what are the innovative ways you can actually come up and find solutions in countries which don't have high level of access to electricity? So these are some of the things that I think we would be expecting the person to do, the types of skills we would be expecting the person to have. We want someone who is dynamic, who is a hard worker, not afraid to make mistakes, but learn from them, and someone, most importantly, who is a great team player. Because in the end, the success of what we do is measured, is going to depend on how well we work as a team. As the success of what we do is how well we work with the client. So being a team player, being there to listen to everyone, and being able to debate and discuss, I think that's going to be very important. And in terms of encouragement, just to say, as I've been saying throughout this hour, I think we are at a very exciting time. I know it seems fairly paradoxical when I say it, given that we are at a very challenging time, but we are at the same time at a very exciting time where any contribution that we make is going to be have a big positive impact in the future. So I've been working in the World Bank. I'm ashamed to say it's almost 30 years now. I'm very old, but it's every day is very exciting. And we, I mean, the type of work we do, the type of people we work with, the type of clients we interact with, it's just a lot of fun. And I'm sure Koichi will say the same thing, that we are always, you go back at the end of each day having learned something, and that is the most fulfilling and satisfying thing for me, and hopefully also having contributed a little bit to improve the lives of people in the countries that we work on.
Great. Thank you very much. This morning, we had a pleasure of having Amit, the Regional Director for Africa in the Human Development Practice Group, connecting from Washington. Amit, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Koichi. Thank you, colleagues, for spending the 1 hour with us. And we look forward to continuing to talk to you. Happy to answer any questions that you may have in the future. And wishing you a very good day throughout Japan. Good morning.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. Next
Bye-bye.
week, thank you. Next week, we are featuring the new report, Walking the Talk, Reimagining Primary Healthcare After COVID-19, featuring Hui Hui Wan, the senior economist in health, nutrition, and population global practice, and one of the main authors of the report. This will be held at 8 a.m. on September 24th, Friday, in Japan Standard Time. So once again, thank you very much for tuning in. Have a wonderful weekend. Actually, we have one more day to go, but let me say, have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy. See you next week. Thank you very much.